PDC or
Democratic Volunteer Center.
It's a Democratic Volunteer Center, which is different from the PDC.
and it's usually in Palo
Yeah.
Alto.
I'm sorry?
It's usually in Palo Alto.
What's usually in Palo Alto?
Your headquarters are usually in Palo Alto.
No, the DVC. We've been in Menlo Park. We've been in Palo Alto. We've been in Mountain View.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, this is the second time we'll be in Mountain View.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, it's 10 after 7 now. I'm going to actually turn this over to Diana to introduce our speaker.
And if I could ask everyone again to mute, that would be great. So thank you everyone for being with us. When we recently had a legislation passed that was going to put fine on food waste. And so on one hand, I was really excited about that, that something was going to be done, you know, to try to curb the excessive loss of food waste and other things just turning to garbage. But as a community leader, I was concerned about what we communities might do in order to protect our companies and our municipalities from those fines. So I can't tell you how excited I was to attend the 21st Century meeting last year, maybe. I guess it was that long ago, where David Blume was presenting, and he was talking about converting food waste to alcohol. So I got extremely excited. So David Blume is, he's CEO of Blume Industries. He's farmer-in-chief, Whiskey Hill Farms. Mr. Blume is a commercial farmer, a regenerative ag tech consultant, biofuels pioneer, author and global food waste optimization consultant. And early in his career, he worked in experimental energy projects with NASA as well as Mother Earth News. In 1980, he founded and ran one of the first successful community-supported agricultural operations in the country, producing food for 430 families and generating an average of $100,000 per acre. So I'm very excited about David being with us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to him, and I'm going to look for his slides on share.
Well, thank you so much. Really glad to be here. I should say to everyone that I am a lifelong Democrat, and basically a strong and organized labor supporter. I can still remember being 9 years old on the picket line in front of Sears Roebuck in the Mission District in San Francisco. So, you know, I feel like I know all of you, you know, in one way or the other, because we've been the beleaguered party now for quite a while.
There we go.
But, you know, democracy is that quaint idea that people should have, you know, some share in the decision making of what, you know, affects them. And, you know, it's gotten kind of trampled on over the years, you know, as we see corporations get bigger and, you know, and different kinds of politics that don't believe in majority rules start to come up. But I am still thinking in my life that I have never seen a system that works more fairly than democracy. And I've been to many, many countries with many, many versions of what government is out there. And I would like to think that as people who, you know, favor democracy, we have to support it with every act. So when you go to the gas station and you put monopoly fuel in your tank, that's not supporting democracy. That's corporatocracy when you put oil or gasoline in your tank. So, you know, when it comes to agriculture, if we can only buy certain products from 3 companies and there are no other competitors, that's not democracy. Democracy requires a financial system that moves profit between people in a way that is not extreme as some of our very large corporate practitioners have made it. So everything I've done in my life is around two things. It's all around eco. Now, ecology, we've all heard that, and we've also heard of economics. So the idea is that both of those revolve around the Greek root, eco, which means home. So ecology is the systems of home, and economics are how we keep track of things of value. But when it comes to, the way we live, democracy is the best way to express our opinion. And so when it comes to fuel, we've had very little choice about that. And when it comes to alcohol, it has always been the most democratic fuel. So how is alcohol made? Well, it starts with plants. So plants absorb carbon dioxide from the air, water, and and solar energy. So those three things together make carbohydrates. And from carbohydrates, we can ferment them. In other words, make basically wine or beer using yeast. And what we get is alcohol and carbon dioxide. But this carbon dioxide that is released in the making of alcohol came from plants, not from oil. So it came from the crops that were grown this year and goes back to them when we burn alcohol, and it goes out the exhaust pipe. So alcohol, being based on solar energy, is ultimately democratic. It doesn't come from a hole in the ground that somebody owns. It comes from the very energy source that falls on all of us. And so it's decentralized, which is a good way to look at democracy because it holds up when things are not concentrated. It does best when things are relating to each other over a community or a distance. And so when it comes to fueling our whole life and our vehicles, what we want to do, if we could possibly do it, is get the fuel we need to drive our cars from somewhere in the general community around where we live, instead of it being transported 10,000 miles from a non-democratic company in the Middle East, country in the Middle East. So we used to do that, and other countries used to do that. Germany, back before World War II, had 77,000 distilleries that provided the alcohol which ran the whole country. They had no oil, they had coal, but you couldn't run a car on coal easily. So alcohol from potatoes was the main way that Germany ran its whole economy. And that went on until the end of World War II. And it unfortunately meant that instead of just bombing 3 or 4 refineries to put them out of business, we had to bomb 77,000 distilleries. So it made it rather resilient, much to our dismay. So the German system was simple. A farmer would bring in his crops, potatoes, barley, whatever. It would be fermented for 3 days. The alcohol would be produced by the yeast and then distilled. The farmer would then get back a third of the alcohol and all the mush left over at the end. Now that was important because that mush was either animal feed or fertilizer. Remember, the crops came from that farmer's land. So by taking the pulp back, what happens is first, it's usually fed to the animals. And then of course they digest it as best they can and poop it out. And then that goes to fertilize the farm. So it's a circle. The nutrients came out of the soil, went into the crop, went into the distillery. The nutrients went back to the animals and then back to the soil. And the alcohol was the surplus, the solar energy. Literally, when you burn alcohol in the car, Buckminster Fuller used to say, you are unwinding the sunlight from that alcohol that was originally a plant. In other words, you are running, quite literally running your car on solar energy in a chemical form. So when you understand that you're making this from solar energy with a little bit of carbon dioxide and water, well, one thing about democracy is it's everywhere, and so is sunlight. So a fuel that's based on what falls on all of us is the ultimate democratic fuel. can't be monopolized. It, you know, it's can be produced with basic technology anywhere in the world. In fact, some people say making alcohol is mankind's second oldest profession. It's been around a long time. And so it's an old, unpatentable, open system way of converting things into something useful. Now, what are some of the things? Well, we've been talking a lot, Tom and I, around the state about all the food processing waste that is generated by 20,000 factories around the United States making food. There's a lot of these everywhere. So in California, we have enormous amounts of food processing waste because we have big agriculture here. Sun-Made Raisin, their factory is bigger than my whole 15-acre farm. Just the processing of the raisins, which then go out, and there's a lot of ugly raisins, and those we turn into alcohol because, you know, and by the way, you can move forward on the slides. I'm sorry I haven't been cueing you there, but let's take a look at what's next, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So just a quick note here, we had Zoe Lofgren here, you know, when she was running. I got to say, Zoe Lofgren, I've met hundreds of politicians in my life in many different countries. And I have to say that Zoe Lofgren is the most intelligent, insightful politician I have ever met. She walked the farm with me, which I hope you guys get to do someday. You'll get to take a tour here. And she asked the most socially relevant, technologically astute questions as we walked around. And it's no surprise that she's a big shot on the science committee of Congress because she gets it. So, you know, here we are with an intelligent Democrat in the House. And I got to say, that was such a relief after all the stuff you see in the press. You'll see some of our other local politicians here. They're all pretty great too. And Jimmy Panetta, which is kind of the other side of Zoe Lofgren. And we've had real accolades from them. So let's go ahead to the next slide. The book in the middle I wrote many years ago. It was a bestseller and is still all around the world in colleges. It's all about everything to do with making alcohol and all the social impacts of using a fuel that's not oil. And it's a complete how-to book for small cooperatives to build their own equipment and do it without anyone's help. So let's go ahead. So one of the things that we're looking at is all that free waste material I used to get. It was just such a wonderful, you know, resource for me. Well, you know, now it can't go to the dump anymore. So if I want it, I got to figure out something to do with it, which I always know what to do. But now it doesn't go to waste anymore. You know, when you bury food processing waste in the landfill, it ferments without air and out comes natural gas or methane. Landfills are the third largest source of methane from everywhere, and the other two are from oil. So our food processing waste is an enormous problem for the environment. And it's also this wonderful resource that we should be using and not throwing away. So now the new law says you can't take food processing waste or anything that rots like that to the landfill. It's got to go somewhere else. So Tom and I have inherited piles and piles of containers, big containers full of beer because you couldn't dump waste beer at the landfill anymore, or the grain that it was made from. You can't dump that there. So, you know, this is the start of something really good because that's an enormous amount of resources. Let's go to the next slide. So, you know, a factory like the one you see here on a couple of acres can produce about 5 million gallons per year. It's a pretty good amount for a community. These things can be built every few miles. Remember Germany when it's 77,000 alcohol plants. So we're able to distribute this, also the employment opportunities, the local business opportunities, everything, unlike the manufacture of oil. So what we have always proposed that we try to process the raw material wherever it's being produced. whether it's in, a cookie factory somewhere, or it's a place making some kind of juice or syrup and have pulp left over. Those things are valuable and they need not to be traded like trash. Now, one of the things we do here, and if we go to the next slide, we'll talk about is there are many things we can make alcohol from. So you'll see over there, for instance, in the upper left-hand corner, a 14-foot tall plant that looks a little like corn, but is actually similar to either sugarcane or sweet sorghum, which is like sugarcane, but grown in colder areas. You see the food processing waste, and of course it's being hauled from place to place. But the things on the right are very interesting today, because as we have discovered, well, those of us who are ecologists knew for a long time, is that mineral fertilizers, things that are mined, those are the very definition of non-renewable. It's not just oil, fertilizer. You go ahead and dig up the phosphorus, you dig up the potassium, and you make it into powders and let farmers spread it on land. And then it rains or it gets irrigated and it washes out of the soil, down the river and out into the ocean. And it's gone forever, in some people's opinion. So we keep mining it. Now, as we know, Ukraine was a huge farming country, and it also had great resources. Like, you're talking about giant mines for potassium and phosphorus, which have now been bombed. But the whole point was that phosphorus was exported to many, many countries around the world. And because farming is not organic in many places, the soil is depleted and is required to be fertilized with mineral fertilizers that, are mined out of the ground. So there are other ways to do it, and that's what I do every day. But all of a sudden, there's this interesting concept, because it used to be that farmers only had 7% of their costs being fertilizer. As of right now, it's 31%. So the people, partially oil companies, part other companies, are now taking 31% of the revenue from the farmers just for the fertilizer, because they're addicted. They weren't organic farming. They now need these soluble fertilizers added every year to have nutrients to be able for the plant roots to take up. Now, we don't even use any fertilizer here on our farm, because we make really good organic compost, which is a combination of organic matter and other things. And it ferments solid state, meaning that the bacteria chew it away for a few months. And then when we put it on the soil, all that stuff is exactly what plants need, because it's just like the rotten leaves on the bottom of a forest floor. Now, when we make alcohol, we only take out the sugars. So all the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, all the main nutrients that we need to fertilize crops are still there in the de-alcoholized liquid at the end. So, because alcohol is only about 10 or so % of the fermented liquid, well, when we take the alcohol out, well, we have 9 gallons of liquid fertilizer left, the raw materials that we made the alcohol from. And that's an amazing thing, because in the past we used to say, well, the fertilizer is actually almost as valuable as the alcohol. And that people would say, oh, yes, very, very nice. Yeah, fertilizer. And now, though, the economic advantage of the fertilizer over the alcohol is 3 to 1. So basically, suddenly fertilizer has become the new gold. And you know what? It's never going to go away, because it's non-renewable, and everybody has figured out if you don't produce enough, you can charge more. So, here's a bottle of our fertilizer, and you can see we go ahead and use this in gardens, but we're about to embark on a much bigger enterprise connected with alcohol production. And we're going to be talking about taking food processing waste in mass and shifting the focus to capturing the, in fact, if you go to the next slide, you'll see some of this. We're going to be working on capturing the nutrients, and then we'll be able to use the alcohol for farm equipment or for energy for evaporating the water out to have powdered fertilizer that can be shipped anywhere in the world without a huge energy cost because you're not moving water. Now that fertilizer, the shortage of fertilizer caused by Ukraine and other effects are going to cause many millions of starvation deaths this year alone. And it could be up to 100 million starvation deaths over the next year if things don't get straightened out and we start getting some of these fertilizers back from where they're not being produced now. Can't wait for that. And if there's anything we all know today, the world is more unstable than it ever has been. And I think we need to protect our food supplies and all of our democratic neighbors around the world, and even everyone else, to make sure they have the nutrients they need to farm their crops. So what we're going to do with our alcohol plants is we're going to focus on the fertilizer value in the leftover mash, and we're working with a company now that would like to see us open an offering on that, because we have many things we can make alcohol from. You'll notice up there in the upper left-hand corner, the common marsh plant cattails. Now, back in the day, I helped invent using those cattails as the final step in sewage treatment. So they are really good at absorbing all the nutrients out of the water that you don't want to dump in the bay or in the ocean. And so, gosh, how much can it reduce it? Well, for instance, you could have nitrates going in. Nitrogen is a very important fertilizer from the sewage, and it goes in at this one end of the marsh, and it's 3,000 units. And by the time it flows to the far end of the marsh, all that nitrate has been removed, and it's down to 5 milligrams per liter. And that is actually lower and safer than the EPA requires sewage to be before you can dump it in water. But we didn't use any machines or any energy to do it. We used biology, and we captured all those nitrates. Now, phosphorus is in the news because of Ukraine. The phosphorus can go in at any level in this end, but when it gets to the other end, it's down to 1 part per billion, or really tiny amount. So we don't really lose any of that. It's all in the cattails, which have the highest biomass production on the planet and the highest alcohol return because they're full of starch, and we can juice those cattails. And with alcohol, we can extract protein from it just by mixing the alcohol with the juice, and the protein drops out. We can feed everyone in Africa or Latin America or whatever, because hunger is not a lack of calories. Hunger is a lack of protein. So everywhere there's enough calories, you can grow sugarcane, you can grow cassava, you can grow potatoes. But when it comes to the protein, that's what causes malnutrition. So we can actually produce all the protein we need, and we can clean up sewage all over the world. And this system I developed with people up at Arcata, University of Humboldt. We now see 500 different cattail sewage treatment plants around the United States. So that technology is really going somewhere. And what are we doing? We're taking the nutrients after they've gone through people from the food we ate, goes through to the, down the drain, and it goes to the sewage treatment plant. And now we're pulling the nutrients back out so that we can reuse them in farming. Normally, this stuff just gets flushed into bays or the ocean. So we're talking about not letting things go to waste. And that's what we were saying about food processing, food for energy. We're now saying it about fertilizer, and the business opportunities are completely off the chart. Let's look at the next one. And when we use these things in our greenhouses, we can produce a lot of things. We can produce mushrooms, we can produce huge amounts of vegetables, grains like sorghum, which you see here. We have a fish pond in our greenhouse, and also a freshwater lobster pond, which is giant crayfish. They come from Australia, and they grow on just rotting plant matter. And so we can go ahead and concentrate the protein and then bring it back to people. And for every gallon of alcohol we make in the plant, we get $40 worth of lobster. So are we a lobster company? Or are we an alcohol plant? Well, it depends on what day of the week, you know? So, so basically what we're saying is if we stop wasting and not recycle, but reacquire these things that were being thrown away and going to the ocean because companies didn't want to do anything about them, well, you know, maybe it's just a good business opportunity, and we provide that, you know, companies provide that service of recycling all those nutrients, and then we can sell it for outrageous amounts of money now because fertilizer is never going to go down. So suddenly, democratic foreign aid might look like recycled brewery waste and sewage through systems that regain all the nutrients and that are concentrated and powdered and sent around the world. Now that's just the start, because right now, what's going on, and we can maybe flip to the next page, is that our sewage currently isn't in a position to be renewed. Now you can see here our system where to the left, there is, you just see the corner of a methane digester, and then that empties into the pond you see next door. And that is now full of cattails, you know, that are pulling all the nutrients out. But this kind of sequencing of ponds can gather it all. But there's a way of making alcohol that is not being done now. And we are looking at starting to do that, which is kelp. The plants that live off of our, in the shallow waters, less than 100 feet off our coast. The kelp is an incredible powerhouse of carbohydrates and nutrients. So where the cattails will give us 7,500 gallons per acre of alcohol, pretty respectable, that's per acre. When it comes to corn, it's only 300 gallons per acre, or 20 times less. But when we go the other way to kelp on floating nets in the ocean, which we harvest 10 feet or more every week off the top, it grows so fast, that those nutrients from the kelp when we make the alcohol are immense. And the amount of alcohol we can make per acre from the kelp is 30,000 gallons compared to 7,500 for cattails or 300 for corn. So alcohol is nature's currency for energy, and we can do that with the carbohydrates. But my organic farm only uses 2 fertilizers. One is fish emulsion, dissolved fish, and the other one is kelp solution. So if we decide to make kelp solution a major thing in the world, we will not run out of energy. Won't be possible. You know, there is some difficulties right now in Norway where the state oil company is working with the national fisheries, and they're trying to patent everything. But, you know, that's not going to be the case, because there's incidences of Norwegian fishermen fermenting kelp and making whiskey for those cold nights out in their boats. So there's plenty of history that would stop it being bottled up in patents. But the amount of work there would be, and the amount of ecological, you know, bursting energy, if we reestablished our kelp forest and managed them, and the amount of fish that would be nursed there, that would be out in the ocean for food, the amount of fertilizer we'd get rid of. And so we don't have all this mined fertilizer, because what are we doing? Exactly what no one said we could do, which is the fertilizer goes into the ocean, the sewage goes into the ocean, and theoretically it's been disposed of and it's gone forever. But with marine algae, we suck that back out of the water, we harvest it, and now we have phosphorus, potassium, trace minerals, everything that I use on my farm already from a commercial source. But if we did it big time, we can replace all the oil fertilizer in the world, no problem. And that is what's important. So let's go ahead to the next slide. And Tom's giving me a note about something to bring up. And he's telling me, oh yeah, well, we're talking about, you know, wastewater to fuel and all that. We've been covering that. But this, you know, this is more about what we talked about, which 1 acre of inputs goes into a Blume system and thousands of gallons come out. So this is not, it needs more development, but it's not new science. People have been doing this for a few hundred years. Let's go to the next one. So, you know, we're talking here with our city of Watsonville, and they've been very excited about our putting a kelp farm and making alcohol from it right at the sewage outfall, which is about 60 feet underwater, just, some distance off our beaches. So yeah, when you think you go to the beach, and if you really know that every city is putting its sewage into the water, well, might make you feel a little funny about going in the water. But that stuff is really good for feeding kelp and other marine algae. And so we're hoping to, in one of our upcoming offers, to go ahead and put in a plant there with the sewage treatment people, so that we are able to turn the kelp into alcohol and fertilizer and sell it in our highly agricultural valley as a non-oil, phosphorus, potassium, and trace mineral source of energy. So, I'm not sure if it's been sent to you or not, but we can send it, which is when all this started going down with Ukraine, and we watched Europe stand back and say, oh, well, we don't really want to be involved between Russia and Ukraine because, well, we get all of our energy from Russia and we don't want to tick them off. That's a betrayal of democracy. If you're going to go ahead and let energy go ahead and interfere with your support of democracy, that is a distortion we can't have. I used to consider that something like only being a vegetarian between meals. If you're only a democracy between conflicts, you're nothing. So how can we make the European countries stand up for the democracy they believe in? Is they have to not be dependent on Arabia or Russia or anyone that can actually make them restrain themselves from supporting democracy because they have something to lose. It totally can be done. We're getting lots of calls from Germany right now to start converting food processing waste. Several countries in Europe are now hoarding alcohol in the event that gasoline is no longer available, because it's very simple to make cars run on alcohol instead of gasoline. We have one project, we want to make a very small unit, which is a chip on plastic that plugs into the engine, and it allows you to run on both alcohol and gasoline without any fuss or bother. We have a kit like that now, but it's big and clunky and costs a lot of money. This thing we're talking about making, we can make for less than $1 million of research, and we can literally give them away at alcohol stations because the production cost may be as little as $1.50 a gallon. But of course, if we sell them for the amount of one tank of gas to people, and that after that, they'll save 2/3 on their cost of fuel, because alcohol at the pump is already a reality. It's a little bit elevated in price compared to what it should be, but it's still far lower than gasoline, a couple of bucks lower than gasoline right now. If we start producing more alcohol, the fuel price will stabilize at a lower point because we have tremendous ability to produce more alcohol. So the 14-point, plan that we're sending out that anybody can pick up off our website, which is Tom, alcohol can be a gas, right? You can get our 14-point thing. What we're encouraging people to do is read it and send it to their various political figures and say, look, President Carter did this when the oil companies jacked prices up back then. And he instituted a windfall profits tax, which is not uncommon in democracy when corporations are too concentrated and they can control prices, not the market. So with the 14-point plan, what it does is it puts some real horsepower by taking a windfall profit tax from the profits of the oil companies, and like President Carter, put it into US production of alcohol, which has no expiration date. Gasoline, 30 days. They got to take it back to the factory and put all kind of awful volatiles in it so that it's not just tar and varnish, because the volatiles evaporate in the air and cause cancer. But there's been bottles of alcohol, liquor found in Greek tombs, basically. And when they take off the wax and the cork, the liquor's still good to drink. So alcohol has an infinite shelf life because it's antibacterial. We all know that alcohol is what we've been using during the pandemic to kill viruses and bacteria. So I'm wandering around, but what I'm saying is the 14-point plan is something that will look smart to any politician. It's not much different, although it's spelled out in more detail than President Carter's plan. But any politician that's against producing alcohol for fuel in the United States, I think has a very limited lifespan once this gets going. And typically it runs along party lines. Republicans with oil influences don't want to see alcohol, and Democrats have supported it ever since Carter. So I think we have a plan to make the world have enough energy so we don't have to let energy bullies and thugs tell us what to do or what not to do because of their supplying us or someone else with fuel. So anyway, the points are all in there. I'm not going to go down one by one, but you'll see it's very common sense. And Craig has been poring over that list for a while there. It's really in big categories. It's increase our production and of course increase our labor and our farming interest and everything, and get away from only corn and grow many different energy crops, which would be more safe for farmers because they'd have a diverse set of products to sell into the energy system and not just corn for feeding cows. So anyway, we have different incentives in there to increase the use of alcohol, which some of them have been done before. Some of them are clever now, but you'll see it's all pretty sensible. We'll probably set up a place where you can call in once a week and talk with me about what we can do with the 14 plan. But the simplest thing is this: everyone should send it to their politicians and get them in some way or another to support the plan. And those who don't support the plan, they're going to be called out. It's going to be really obvious. And, it's not going to be the Democrats. We're going to be for this. And if you want to win elections, you got to get the Midwest. And the Midwest is where alcohol's made right now. And it provides prosperity for Midwest towns all over the center of the country. And that support of that is going to help convince people which party they should be voting with. And, I remember Reagan, Bush, both Bushes, etc. They always promise alcohol production increases in the Midwest, and they never do it. So I think we go out there and we start talking about food processing to alcohol. We talk about making more energy crops and reduce the amount of corn and increase the amount of land and production for energy. The dirty truth is that a very small part of our farmland is actually cultivated. Most of it is run to grass, because if you made all the corn you could, it will crash the market and no one will have any money. So it's actually only about 7 or 8% of our farmable land is actually used to make our major crops of soybeans and corn. And all the rest could be making fertilizer, energy, fuel, electricity, the whole thing. And, none of this is exotic or impossible. This is all being done in 50 countries around the world right now. And Brazil itself no longer sells straight gasoline to anybody. It's all alcohol, or for very old vehicles with carburetors, they sell a 23% alcohol because they don't want anyone to throw their vehicle away if they don't want to. They're just trying to accommodate those people. But virtually every car in Brazil runs on 98% alcohol right now. And you're sitting there with a group of people, and if you ask anyone around you, what country is already energy independent and runs on alcohol? And if you ask 100 people, one person will raise their hand and know it's Brazil. How is that possible in the most well-informed country in the world, that you can't point to a giant country that no longer uses oil to run their cars? And with that, I'm ready to open the floor to questions, and let's go ahead. So we can take down the slide, and let's go ahead and take questions.
Thank you so much. And I did want you to spend 5 minutes talking about flex fuel and how much cleaner the engines are
Oh, sure.
and some of the benefits of that. And my favorite story you told was about the jet engines when they're being chased by missiles. That
Yes,
if you
yes.
have time for that story, that would be.
Absolutely. This is important to know. Alcohol is not the same as gasoline in an important way. Alcohol has no pollution. Okay, none. When you burn alcohol, the only thing that goes out the exhaust pipe is carbon dioxide and water. Well, if you remember at the start of the talk, to make alcohol, plants use carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight to make the starch and sugar that we make into alcohol. So when the carbon dioxide and water go out the tailpipe, that's what crops need next year to make more alcohol, make more sugar, more alcohol. There's no nasty hydrocarbons, volatiles, toluene, xylene, benzene, none of that stuff comes out the tailpipe of an alcohol car. It's basically the stuff you and I are breathing out into our room right now, carbon dioxide and water. Now, what that means for your engine is no carbon in the engine at all. There's no hydrocarbon soot. So, I did a project with Arthur Daniels Midland back in the 80s where we converted diesel engines, which was considered impossible, to run on alcohol. And we ran a brand new diesel engine for 500,000 miles, which not hard if you're Archer Daniels Midland delivering grain everywhere. And the inside of the engine, when you took the head of the engine off and you look down in the cylinders where the pistons are, they were bright and shiny, and the original machining marks that were left over in the middle of the walls of the cylinder were still there. They weren't worn off like they are in gasoline after a short time, because soot is like sandpaper in the engine. So historically, there have been many studies, seems like once every 10 years, starting in the 1900s, where engines running on alcohol have at least 3 times the life of engines running on gasoline. So, now the opposite of what you hear from the propaganda is that alcohol will wreck your car. The reverse is true. As all good propaganda, the truth is exactly the opposite. So it actually triples the engine life, and your oil changes are once every 25,000 miles instead of once every 3,000 to 4,000 miles, because there's nothing fouling the oil. There's no nasty solvents or carbon or whatever. So, for a company with trucks, that's an enormous savings. And for us, it's a lot of inconvenience we don't have to do to go to get our oil changed. So alcohol is good on every single point, except in really cold weather. It doesn't start a car as good as gasoline. That's because with gasoline, they dump all these additives in it in the winter that are volatile, like benzene, which is horribly carcinogenic. So they can start. Now we can do the same thing. We can put in ethyl ether, which is a harmless chemical. It's an anesthetic, and it's made from alcohol. So we can put that in, and that will start us way down to 20 below zero. And we don't need to use any petroleum to make the car start on a cold day if we don't want to. Currently, people do mix 10 or 15% gasoline in with their alcohol to start in minus 30-degree mornings up in Wisconsin or something, but we don't have to do that. And the technology to make ethyl ether is off patent and well known, and it is made from alcohol. So it's completely non-petroleum and can be used in any weather, including Arctic and Antarctic ice stations where pollution is an issue. Next question.
All right. So
I'm sorry. She asked
Terry
me.
and Claudia did. They're raising their hand, and that's what I'm asking everybody is raise your hand, and we'll take all the questions in order.
And
so
hold on just a second, because she asked me for a story which I didn't tell, and I'll tell it very quickly, which is, so, war has a way of escalating. So it used to be that we had heat-seeking missiles, right? So if a jet goes by, a heat-seeking missile would go after the heat of the jet engine and blow the engine up. So then the Israelis, in their escalation, figured out if you threw very hot magnesium flares out behind about the plane, the missiles would get confused and hit one of the flares and not the plane. So then the next level of escalation was when computers got good at smelling smog, they put a smog meter in front of the missile, and it would follow the exhaust of the jet engine until it blew up the engine. So then our military said, we know how to solve this. So they segmented the wing tank. The wings on planes are the fuel tank. So they segmented and put alcohol in one and jet fuel in the rest. So now, and this is all detailed in my book. So anyway, when the jet is roaring by and they fire a missile at it with a smog meter, which would follow the soot from the engine to blow up the engine, well, an alarm goes off on the dashboard of the jet. They slam over to alcohol, the emissions disappear, and the missile can't find the jet. That's our military using our renewable fuel to save soldiers' lives. I like that. Let's go to questions.
All right, Carrie and Flavia.
Okay, and if you've already covered this, forgive me if I wasn't paying attention correctly enough. Ethanol has been an additive in gasoline, and we've heard it say that, it's expensive to produce and it doesn't have a very good carbon footprint. And I understand that you're advocating for using different fuel sources other than corn, like kelp or the pussy willow, the canes.
Yeah.
So that's one question, is you've addressed the ethanol expense problem. And the other question is, when you line up production carbon footprint against oil, it seems like you don't have the extraction cost that oil has, but you do still have a little bit of carbon footprint to heat the contents up enough to ferment, to distill everything. So could you line up the production cost versus fossil fuel?
Yes, absolutely. That's a very insightful question you've asked. People don't drill down very often to think about what energy was used to make the fuel. But what we do here at our plant is when the liquid comes out of the plant at the bottom, the stuff that doesn't ferment into alcohol, well, it goes into a methane digester, which makes natural gas. And then we use the natural gas to fire the still, which is a renewable fuel, regenerative fuel. And so there's no need to use fossil fuels for energy to make the alcohol. So when you do it that way, rather than the convenient, stupid way, which is to use, petroleum natural gas, which is what all the really big alcohol plants are doing, the 100 million gallon per year, it's like, you don't have to do it stupidly. That's not required. You can do it intelligently. And in Brazil, that's what they do. They ferment molasses, they make the alcohol, the molasses stuff left over goes into a methane digester. It makes natural gas. What methane is, natural gas, and then it runs the plant. And Brazil doesn't have to use any fossil fuels to make a whole nation's worth of fuel, and I don't do it either. So you got to understand with alcohol, every time there's a positive story, the American Petroleum Institute inundates the media with some story that says it's not. And the API is the largest public relations firm on the planet, and they spend a lot of their time trashing the challengers to oil, and alcohol is the biggest, scariest one for them.
Okay, next question from Gail. You're still muted.
Yeah, this is very, very interesting. And the point is well taken that you can use cattails and kelp. However, using land-based agriculture, if you are talking about adding onto our land-based agriculture, I would suggest you may be running up against the dwindling supply of water. You might, so I want to ask about that. And also, what role could hemp play in this, because hemp is much easier to grow and requires less water?
Yes, hemp is a wonderful plant to do many, many things. But hemp is mostly all plant fiber. That's why we can make thread from it and clothes from it and everything. And the only place where there's a little bit of carbohydrate is in the seeds, because carbohydrate is what a seed uses to give food to start the process of sprouting. So corn, is loaded with seeds, tons of seeds. And each seed or kernel of corn is 75% starch and 25% other good stuff. So, grains and seeds are not the best way to make alcohol. It's just that we happen to have a lot of corn that we use it. Now, just to make sure that you understand that we're not wrecking food while we make alcohol, cows, which are the main source, the main place that corn goes to, cannot digest starch at all. You and I, we have a nice acid stomach, we have enzymes, we can break that all down, and we can break it down to the point where we get so much sugar from it, we get diabetes. But cows are different. Cows have a pH 7 gut, which is the same as water, no acids, no alkaline. And so they cannot break down the starch, and they poop it out in huge quantities, which makes a lot of methane, and it's a problem. So if you take the starch out first by fermenting it and making alcohol, and then you feed the 3 times concentrated protein and other good stuff to the cow instead of with the starch, they gain weight 17% more and 30% faster, because the starch is not bunging up their digestive system. So the answer is, if you want more food, in the case of meat, you have to ferment your corn first and make it into alcohol so that they don't have to suffer with that starch in their guts.
And then the issue of water, we're running out of water for growing things.
Making oil takes 20 gallons of water per gallon of gasoline produced. Alcohol only takes 2.5 gallons per gallon produced. Alcohol, water is reused over and over in the plant. In an oil refinery, it's destroyed and is poisonous and can't be reused even in its own plant to most degrees. So that is another propaganda that's out there, but it's been disproven voluminously many times, and basically alcohol is about a 2.5 to 3 to 1 water to fuel made, and gasoline is 20 gallons.
That includes the process of growing the vegetative matter that you made the oil from, that you made the alcohol from.
Well, I got to tell you, we don't count rain, okay? Rain falls whether or not we're growing corn. So we're not using water to irrigate corn in this country. It's all rain fed. So, that rain falls on that land whether or not, the corn is there. So that's not counted as input water for corn.
Yeah, being in California, we go rain, what's that? Yeah.
Well,
Right,
in California, I can deal with water because I'm a farmer, and I can tell you it's manageable and we can do much more than we're doing now, but let's move on.
Yeah. All right. Next question from Marshall.
Yeah, thanks. It was quite interesting, fascinating. And I'm interested in the issue of CO2
Right.
and increasing CO2 from the process. And so my question is, how does the net, how do you deal with the fact that we're trying to move, for example, to all electric cars and to de-fossil fuel all of the ways that we make electricity by adding CO2 through your method? What's the net gain from yours versus the other?
It's the best subject I love to hate, which is electric cars. Do you have an electric car?
I do.
Okay. And do you fill it with nuclear power or do you fill it with coal power?
I fill it with solar power.
You have a solar panel on your panels on your roof that take care of all the needs of your car.
Well, it turns out that in San Mateo County, almost all of our power is delivered from solar sources.
That's wonderful. And that is such a unique thing in the entire country, because almost all the power that's made in the country is natural gas, coal, petroleum, and nuclear.
Yeah,
So
but that's changing. That's,
oh no, believe me, it's not changing hardly at all. So you might remember back during the Bush era that they said hydrogen is the new fuel. Do you remember that way back then? And
I do.
everybody was going for hydrogen because it's perfectly clean, blah, 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 blah. And it's totally insufferable. It's totally impossible as an alternative for a lot of reasons, which I won't get into here, but it distracted everyone from alcohol for almost 10 years. So the thing is about electricity is that this country basically doesn't even quite have enough electricity for all the grid in our current uses. You have 100 horsepower car, you are talking enormous amounts of new electricity is going to be made, and the electric industry is looking at nuclear to supply it. So you're in a unique situation where you're in a county that has purchased, the production from some renewable places, but that's not true almost anywhere else. So the point is there's not physically enough electricity to run cars on it. There never will be, because the load from those big engines would never, you'd have to build a completely new grid to deliver that electricity at over $1 trillion. And all you'd end up is most of it would be coal, nuclear, natural gas to make that electricity, even though we'd all love it if it was solar. Ed Begley has 40 solar panels on his roof, and he used that to charge his Prius, overnight, so that it was all charged up. But I said, Ed, what happens when you go over 60 miles an hour? Well, he said, well, then it runs on, gasoline. I go, that's right, Ed. And I go, what happens when you're too far from your solar panels? Oh, it's running on gasoline. And so what you find out about electric cars, people bring electric cars down to my farm all the time. And then they go, wow, can I charge up because I can't get home with the power that's in my car, right? So I got to tell you that electric cars, they're one of those things that sounds really great, and it's a total distraction from having to do something about fossil fuel. And, if you can make your own electricity with a small generator at home running on alcohol, I totally support your use of electric cars.
Well, would you also support it if we all had solar that charged our electric car?
Sure. And given 75 years, we will have solar that will charge all of our cars. But there are not enough resources to make that many panels. Solar panels are not very efficient. I have other ways of making power from solar energy using the heat. And I totally think electricity is worth producing, and it would be wasted putting in a car. See, here's the basic thing for everybody. If you make electricity, you use 2 parts of some other kind of energy to make the third part of electricity. So electricity is, if you burn natural gas, you'll burn 2 times as much energy to make the 1/3 of electricity. They're not all the same. Electricity is incredibly valuable. So, it's a waste to put it in a car. We need it for so many important things. But the thing is, you don't get any benefit, because if you run your car on fossil fuel, well, you could say electricity is a benefit, but you would get more miles on the gasoline or the oil that was used to make the electricity than you would get from the car running on electricity. It's a bait and switch, and it's to distract us from doing truly renewable things. That's not to say that San Mateo County can outbid everyone else for solar production so that county can say it's energy safe. But, that just means there's a bunch of other counties that don't get that electricity. There's not enough to go around, and there will never be. So I don't know how to get into it any more than that. The electric people are all talking about nuclear power, and it's kind of ugly. All right, sorry, I got on my soapbox. Let's do something else.
Okay, next question from Greg. Oh, you're muted, Greg.
Hey, Greg.
Not
There you go.
everybody, not everybody is in the business is talking about nuclear energy. That's not true.
No, I know. I'm just.
No, but look, that's not my question. My question is, have you looked at the numbers? How much of the economy do you have to transform to make the amount of alcohol that's needed to replace all the gasoline that we're using? How much is that? What are the numbers?
Yeah, I've looked at that and I don't have it all memorized, but it's a surprisingly small amount. I can give you the rough idea. We can build alcohol plants for somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 to $5 per annual gallon of capacity. So if it's a 5 million, gallon per year plant, well, it might be 25 or $30 million. But the point is, if you're going to build an oil refinery, well, let's not even go there. Oil is out of the question. So the point is, the best plan is to build many smaller plants close to where the raw materials are, because the cost in producing alcohol is not the capex of the plant. It's in the transportation of raw material to the plant. So, that energy and cost of moving, let's say we're talking about raisin waste from the Central Valley to a plant in Watsonville, that's not smart. It'd be better to build a plant out near the raisins, because the energy it takes to move the diffuse energy product of solar energy as sugar, you have to have more small plants. And that's been done before, and it worked really good, and it works in Brazil. So this is not a difficult question to solve. Capital-wise, it's one of the most inexpensive energy changes in our economy, and the payback is literally 2 to 3 years.
Why did Germany get away from this production of alcohol?
Because at the end of the war, the United States forced the Nuremberg articles down Germany's throat, and it said for the next 50 years, Germany is not allowed to make alcohol for fuel at all. And
because of what?
Because it made them dangerous. They weren't dependent on oil, so we couldn't just bomb their refinery and stop the war. So they had this decentralized source of energy all over the country, and we couldn't stop them. The only German war machines that used a synthetic oil made from coal were staff cars and the tanks that Rommel drove. Everything else ran on alcohol. Their whole aircraft, all their ground vehicles, everything ran on alcohol in World War II. And we could not stop the war because we couldn't cut them off of fuel. So in the Nuremberg Accords, we said, you can't have alcohol anymore. And that expired, I think, 15 years ago. And Germany is starting to make alcohol like crazy again, because they know they have a history, and they are stockpiling it because they've just seen what happens when Russia cuts them off of fuel. So that's why we stopped them from doing it. And it was our oil companies that argued for the Nuremberg Accords to make sure they couldn't compete. So the history of alcohol is dirty and filthy and hard fist capitalism. And, that's then. This is now.
Sorry.
I was just going to say that's the same story with petroleum. It's a dirty and icky and politically minded story. Greg, are you done, or shall we? I'm going to close with one.
I just want to add that I've heard that people are worried about alcohol because they're going to drink it.
Well, we poison the alcohol before we put it in the gas tank. If we don't poison it, then it would be drinkable and you'd have to pay the beverage tax. So the current formula is 2% gasoline added to 98% alcohol. And believe me, you will not siphon the tank and drink that, because gasoline is disgusting. But ethyl ether does it just as well. And it's a new formula that's been approved. And because it's anesthetic, if you drink it, you'll knock yourself out and maybe kill yourself. But ethyl ether has been environmentally completely benign and made from alcohol. So that's the new, what we call denaturant, making it not natural anymore. So yes, people could drink it. And, the only thing that would be harmed is some liquor tax collection. But as Ronald Reagan pointed out, not my favorite president, but he said this one smart thing. He said the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms people collect $10.50 on every gallon of alcohol made, but they use up $10 per gallon made in bureaucracy, because it's a 150-year-old, bureaucracy, which has just been building on itself forever. And so he was saying, well, we should get rid of the tax on alcohol and that whole agency because it was a waste of tax. Well, no one ever did that because the things were the way they were and nothing's ever changed. So, if you don't want to pay that horrible tax, then you have to make the fuel undrinkable. And all around the world, that's how we do it. They add 2% of something toxic.
Okay. And Bill, I'm going to ask the last question because we're already kind of over time. I want to ask this really quick. You were talking about the new California law and about food waste can't go into the landfill anymore. What does that mean for a community like here, San Mateo County? What are we going to need to do, and how easy is that going to be to build, to get people on board? I mean, we've had green bins for years. I don't know that,
Well, the way it gets on board is the way everything gets on board. You got to make money at it. If you make money at it, people invest in it, and then all of a sudden, people go, well, why was that ever a problem? Why didn't they do this forever? The price of fertilizer nowadays by itself makes it worthwhile for us to take food processing waste, make alcohol as a byproduct, and make fertilizer, which we can send all around the world and all over the United States instead of oil fertilizer. But you have the profit from the alcohol, especially if it's pharmaceutical grade or solvent grade. It's not fuel anymore. It's worth some money. So the point is, there are people making money on alcohol all over the world, and you're not knowing about it. Doesn't mean it isn't happening. Okay. I mean, every drug, here's how you make drugs. Let's say you take a bunch of willow branches and you shred them up and you throw them in a bucket of alcohol and you stir it a little, right? And then, well, you use a strainer and you strain out the wood and heat up the alcohol till it evaporates and there's a white powder left in the bottom of the bucket. Does anybody listening today know what that white powder is? I'll give you a hint. It's not cocaine. It's aspirin.
Oh.
Willow extract is aspirin. So now 50% of all Western drugs start off this way, taking a plant material, extracting it with alcohol, and then they might do other steps to it. But, our Western medicine actually comes from herbal medicine through alcohol, and then the alcohol is evaporated, the raw material is then made into drugs. So, you know how many drugs we sell in this country? Not just a little, and that's all made from alcohol. There's so many markets for it. So what I'm trying to say is you make money on alcohol. I mean, our plant here, Craig has been studying it. You could talk to him about studying all of our pro formas and stuff. And he can see that this is a real business. And, it's a funny thing about liquor, which is alcohol. When times are good, people drink. And when times are bad, they drink more. So talk about a stable product from alcohol as one of the number of products you can make from food processing waste into alcohol. It could, you can say, old orange peels alcohol, that would be not a very appetizing label, but, it's the idea that the alcohol is the alcohol. There are so many ways to make money with it. It's amazing. If you want to see any of our financial offerings for the plant here, et cetera, I don't, because of SEC, I can't just give you a website that everybody can go to and tell everyone else about. But there's a private page, and since you are a small group of now my friends, you can go look at that. And for those of you who want to just write this down, it's pretty simple. It's WHF for Whiskey Hill Farms. Permaculture, like permanent agriculture.com. And if you go to that, there'll be, you ask for a password, and the password is expand the farm, and that private page will open and you can look at what's there. So we're happy to answer questions about that. Yes, thank you for putting that on the screen. That's exactly right. I think it's actually the first three letters are all lowercase. So you might want to make that modification. I don't think it makes a difference, but just in case. So anyway, yes, we are a business. We are not a nonprofit, although people can't tell sometimes. I mean, we teach Hispanic farmers how to farm regeneratively. We, we bring kids here to explain how farming works and have them eat their first carrot right out of the ground. It's great. You go over and say, hey, pull that weed. And they grab the top and they pull out and they go, oh my God, there's a carrot attached to this weed. Kids are so clueless about farming. We love teaching them. So anyway, I'm going to Baja California at the end of this month to consult for the Mexican government. We're going to be bioremediating Baja, which used to largely be a forest and now it's a desert. And that's what I do for my fun, is I go redesign and repair the planet, But we'll also be making alcohol from cactus. Prickly pear cactus is enormously productive. It's all over as a pest all around the world, and it's perennial. You cut it down, it grows right back. So we have, in Baja, there's tons of this, and they have real problems with energy down there. And there's, invasive species that we can capitalize on, and plant ecosystems that provide both food and energy and stop the runoff of chemicals. So, I'm never bored. I'm always busy. And now there are businesses that I have wonderful colleagues that go ahead and run for me.
Well, thank you so much. It's been really, I'm just kind of going, I'm looking at all my notes going, okay, I got to start thinking about this a little more, because nobody's talking about alcohol as a fuel. It was kind of 10 years ago maybe, but not today. And you're right. We need to be thinking of every source we can use, and not just, solar's good, but you know what?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. But
let me just close on one note. I spoke last year at COP26, the climate change conference based on the Paris Accords. And I had a display there, and my tech partner had another display about energy and how we produce it and how we can change things. And routinely, all these delegates from all over the world came to our booth and talked with us and said, you two guys are the only people that have any solutions here. Everyone else is talking about measuring the damage, using technology to see the damage, or otherwise have a platform about the damage. Oh God, platforms, I hate that word. So the thing was, in the whole international conference, very few people talk about how to solve the problems. And I'm telling you, as an ecologist, if we don't fool around as we continue to fool around, we can fix this and make money doing it. It's like, it's being done the stupidest way possible, running our world right now. And with a little bit of insight and a little bit of capital, which capital seems to flood everywhere for stupid ideas, we can make this go and be a profitable business for thousands and thousands and thousands of entrepreneurs. And so, that's where I'm at. I'm not a nonprofit saying, send me donation money. I'm telling you that this is a business, and if you can't make it as a business, it will never spread and it will never take off. And if you can appeal to people's desire to do something good for a living, this is a good living.
Thank you so much. I think I speak for everyone. It's been really an amazing talk, and really appreciate it. All right. Thank you. Okay. Next up, I'm going to go back over our upcoming events really quick.